All right, now that you know what we are going to build, we will completely get rid of everything in the model to start together from scratch. So let's just delete our D2P root layer and just start from the master surface. So what we are going to create first is the building grid. In general, when you start defining and modeling something parametrically, you want to anchor to something. You want to have a reference system. In that case, we just define like the building grid, some axis and Y and X direction, which we want to put into one of our component containers. So let's just bake it before we dive into. We just create the component. Yeah, you see, this is our first component. It's a roof instance in that case of type grid. And you can see the link between the grasshopper definition and the Rhino layer tree like this. So we have a create component, which takes 3 input parameters. The first one is the type. The second one is the component instance name, which we see here, the roof. And the third one is the plane, which is also like the plane used for that text label. So the type itself is composed out of a type ID, which is the grid you see here, the type name, which is the building grid, which you see here in the layer tree. And that's basically it. There are some other things you can play around with. Now that we have our first component in the model, we want to actually fill it with geometric information. So remember, we have our building grid, we have axis in X and in Y direction, and now we want to sort them into like the layer tree and into the component instance. In order to do that, we are going to create component members, which consists out of a layer information and the geometry. So in that case, we just use the X-axis and we create a list, which in the end defines the layer structure. So here you see like axis X, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, and the geometry, and we map them together. Yeah. So the outcome of that one is a component member, which we then can use to assign to our existing component. So which we just had in the model. And let's display here what's already there. So you see, in the moment we are connecting it, we get also access to it in the component. We can now bake it. And you see below our component instance, the layer tree has been populated. And when we click on our component, you see also in that object, in that component instance, we got our axis. We're going to do the same thing for the y-axis. So we just connect them and we rebake. And you see also the y-axis have been populated. And our first component, the grid component, is done. Now that we have created our grid component, we want to create our beam components. Let's just assume that every beam will be created on exactly the axis of the grid. So in order to do that, we stream what we already have. So this is like the next concept I want to introduce here. So streaming components. We just saw it in the beginning and we make use of it from now on. That is one of the core ideas behind the components, that you can reuse what's already in the model. So you can, for example, stream by type. In that case, you just use that component and put in the component type. In that case, it is grid. Then we get the component instantiated into our grasshopper canvas and can retrieve the geometry we want to use further on. For example, the axis in X direction. We're also streaming the master surface, which could be technically also part of the grid. Here it's just an input geometry. Doesn't make a difference there. Then we compute the intersections between these axis and the surface. And that's basically it. So from here on, the procedure is exactly the same, which we already experienced in the first model with the context and the grid. We create new component types. In that case, it's an L beam, so a longitudinal beam, and a T beam, which stands for transversal beam. And we fill these components with information. In that case, with the reference axis, which is exactly the intersection curve of what we have seen here, what we set up in the beginning. Then we create the component members as already known and put them back into the component. And in the end, you can get a preview and check if everything is set up correctly. You see the labels. You might see also, like if you look a little closer, the axis. So now let's just bake it. Here we go. And we get both component types with all the instances created into the model. All right, now that we have created our beam instances with the reference axis, we want to actually extend them and fill them with more life. So in order to do that, we are going to make use of a new streaming component, which streams basically all type information which are available in the model, which are currently the grid, the L-beam, and the T-beam types. We stream all the available instances and set up a logic in order to then create the beam volumes. I will not go into detail into that, but if you are interested in how we set it up, just check out the files which are attached to the video. And after we created the volumes, we do the usual stuff. So we create layer information for the row volume below a volume layer, and attach them to our existing components. And if we now bake the stuff, you see what's happening in the model. It creates beside our or below our components new layers, like here, the volume, row volume. And now our components are filled with more information.